Hi guys, it's Janae and welcome back to my channel. And I'm sorry I am so late, but we're here. I had to literally restart my computer for my audio to start working, and then the moment that I had the audio sorted, my camera stopped working. So it's kind of a miracle that we're here, I feel. Sorry about that. Anyway, hi. I hope you guys are doing okay. I see there's a lot of conversation going on in the chat, so that's wonderful. I'm glad you guys could at least do something nice while I was trying to sort out my life. But yeah, hi, if you're new here, I'm Janae. I try and read anime, and at the moment it feels like all I do instead is cry. And we usually go for about 3 hours. We're gonna aim for 3. We'll see how I feel at the 2-hour mark, considering... Oh wow! Oh my goodness, yeah, that is amazing. Wow. That thoroughly threw me off course here. Oh, considering the fact that I think we're entering Shimei torturing Chuaning era, so yeah, I don't know what to say about that. Thank you. I realized it's probably not a good idea because I did this because I was filming for a video essay that I'm very excited about. And now I'm realizing how blue it is and how messy it could get if I start crying, so that's great. I wasn't expecting to still be wearing this makeup at this point in the day, but anyway. So if I look ridiculous, please just bear with me, I'm sorry. I mean, if I look ridiculous by the end of this, because of all the crying. Okay, now that I am thoroughly done postponing this, I guess. Yes, I have not found a waterproof mascara that I like, and I always am like scared about trying a new mascara that claims to be waterproof and finding out that maybe it's not. I should probably just do some research, but anyway, until then, we are here, and we'll see how this session treats us. Also, I am kind of gonna use this session as a gauge to see whether or not I will be able to continue the rest of this volume specifically as a live, because yeah, I have not heard pleasant things about it. Not that it's not a good volume, just not a pleasant volume. So okay, we were, for anyone who wants to follow along with the actual volume, on page 53, chapter 248. Forgetting. That does not sound good. Chuaning had no choice but to go. He threw on a thick fox fur cloak, opened an oil paper umbrella, and went to Wushan Palace. The hall was lit by a forest of branching lamps, cast of bronze inlaid with silver. 99 flames flickered like a river of stars, filling Wushan Palace with their radiance. The servants on both sides were familiar to Chu Zongshi's overnight stays. As he entered through a side door, they bowed respectfully with their eyes lowered. Stony-faced, Chuaning strode down the covered corridor towards the sleeping quarters in the rear of the palace. When he reached the carved red lacquered door, he raised a hand and pushed it open. Sorry. I've heard not so nice things about this volume too. Yeah, no, and this comes from Kikta. This volume made her cry, and apparently she's not a crier. So I am a crier. I'm very nervous for myself. Anyway. The room was stifling, a world apart from the torrential rain outside, and the air was heavy with the scent of alcohol. Moran occupied the bed, lying indolently on his side and drinking from a small jar of red clay that he gripped in jade-white fingers. You came. Met with silence, Moran went on. Sit. Chuaning walked to the bamboo mat farthest away from Moran and sat down. He closed his eyes. Moran didn't demand he move closer. He was already several cups in, his pallid cheeks tinged faintly with pink, his dark irises, so black they seemed purple, glimmered as he looked sidelong at Chuaning. He took another swig of wine and tilted his head back, studying the carved dragons and phoenixes on the ceiling as he drummed his fingers against his knee. Do you still know how to make wontons? He asked. Chuaning's lashes quivered minutely. Not anymore. You made them before, Moran said, as if unwilling to accept his answer. The year he left. I didn't make them well. Chuaning's expression was impassive. You weren't wrong to call me I don't like this. A piss-poor copycat. Moran narrowed his eyes. Do you hold a grudge against this venerable one? No. So what if this venerable one ordered you to make some right now? Chuaning didn't answer. Moran stared at him, eyes blazing. I'm asking you a question. If I told you to make me a bowl of wontons right now, would you? If I did, at last Chuaning opened his eyes and looked coolly at Moran. Would you eat them? The retort caught Moran by surprise. He flushed at once. Whether from the alcohol or rage, his gaze slackened, his eyes losing focus. Jaw clenched, he tossed the wine jar to the floor in front of the table, where it broke, sending exquisite pearl blossom white splashing over the stone. When he got to his feet, his expression was dangerous, like a mountain lumbering upright. Stepping over the shards of broken pottery, he stalked over to Chuaning and grabbed him by his collar. You're no different from Song Chutong, Moran said through gritted teeth. All you do is cause this venerable one displeasure. He released Chuaning and paced like a bird of prey, circling, footfalls roving to and fro until they abruptly came to a stop. He turned to pin Chuaning with a glare. When did you teach me the phrase, I hope you may greet these words with a smile, for writing is akin to reuniting? Oh, that's still bothering him. Okay. Interesting. I'm of two minds at the moment because on the one hand I wish Meatban would stick to calling this Moran Ta Jun, but on the other hand I think it might be a purposeful decision to kind of remind us as the audience that even though we like to keep them separate, technically at one point they were one and the same. Ta Jun was drunk. There was no rhyme or reason to his questioning. He simply said whatever came to mind. Why don't I remember it at all? An ice-cold hand closed around Chuaning's wrist. Moran hauled him upright and dragged him over to the desk. He readied a brush, then unfurled a scroll with a snap. Write it for me. Teach me again. Chuaning had been feverish when he arrived, and Moran's infuriating demands added to the uncomfortable pressure building within his skull. He sputtered and coughed, face reddening. Moran thrust the brush into his hand. Right, he snarled. Hurry up. Chuaning's health had been fragile since he shattered his core in that decisive battle against Moran. As he doubled over in another fit, he began to cough up flecks of blood. Crap. Only then did Moran pause. Staring at those drops of scarlet sinking into the paper, he slowly loosened his grip. Finally, Chuaning took a shuddering breath. It's a common greeting in a letter, he said. It doesn't mean anything else. He wiped the corner of his mouth with a handkerchief and, exhaling, looked up at Moran. You used to begin every letter with this phrase. I suppose you haven't written anything for so long that you've forgotten. I used to write letters? Moran turned those dark eyes on him. To whom? His voice shook on an indignant edge. Who did I write letters to? Who in the world could I possibly write to? What a load of rubbish. But Moran sounded agitated and despondent, a scattered light jumping in his eyes. It was at that moment that, for the first time, Chuaning had a vague inkling that something was amiss. He didn't linger on the thought. Moran's forgetfulness could be chalked up to his inebriation. I know how to say this word, and for some reason... Inebriation. He only furrowed his brow without replying. In the library of Wushan Palace, there was a Qiankun pouch in which all of the Shizun Peak's letters had been filed away. Moran paced in circles like a caged beast until he suddenly remembered that box. Dragging Chuaning along with him to the library, he dug out the dusty case and ripped open letter after faded letter. This is very much reminding me of when he revisited his old room and tried to wear his old clothes again after Chuaning's passing. Oh goodness. I'm nervous. The majority of the letters had been written by disciples, organized according to the elders they'd studied under. Most of the writers had perished when Moran betrayed the sect. Among all the elders of Shizun Peak, the Yuheng elder had the fewest disciples, only 3. Their letters were easily found. Quickly, Moran pulled out a thick stack of pages and tore it open, fingers trembling. It was indeed his handwriting, immature and crooked, but shockingly earnest. He flipped through letter after letter. On each one was written, "I hope you may greet these words with a smile, for writing is akin to reuniting." Every single letter without exception. Moran's hands were shaking, his eyes flashing with an inconsistent light. "Mom, I hope you may greet these words with a smile, for writing is akin to reuniting." "Shun Jie, I hope you may greet these words with a smile, for writing is akin to reuniting." Those bygone greetings sent a shiver down his spine. His face took on a dangerous cast, his handsome features shadowed by dark storm clouds. Chuaning stood to the side, indifferent, until Moran's turbulent expression finally began to make him uneasy. At last he couldn't help fixing his gaze on that man frantically rifling through old letters before the writing table. Chuaning felt a twinge of foreboding, as if a tiny bird pecked at his heart. He slowly paced closer, studying Moran's bewildered, manic expression. Something wasn't right. But what? "My mom was already dead," Moran mumbled, looking up at Chuaning. "Why would I write a letter to her?" Chuaning scrutinized him carefully, that prickling sense of dread now boring through his chest like a terrible darkness ready to blot out the sun and swallow him whole. It was bizarre that Moran would forget a common salutation, yet it wasn't impossible. But for him to have no recollection of writing any of these letters was truly inexplicable. Moran was still skimming through those pages. "I hope you may greet these words with a smile. I hope you may greet these words with a smile." His violet-black irises glinted with torment. He seemed to be missing an entire swath of memories. Chuaning could almost hear the sound of something shattering in his ears. He held his breath, spine tingling. In the silence of the deserted library, Chuaning hesitated, then asked softly, "Don't you remember? Back then, you said even though your mom couldn't get your letters, you still wanted to write to her." Moran jerked his head up. Chuaning felt as though his blood was slowly turning to ice in his veins. "The first thing you learned to write wasn't your own name," he said. Staring at him blankly, Moran said, "What was it?" The first word he had me teach you was mom. Oh. Ow. I'm assuming it's something to do with the general chess formation, one of the after effects of all of the forbidden techniques that he'd been using. But does that mean Shimei will come to suffer the same fate? Or is Shimei safe because he's technically been using Shuanglin as a figurative pawn, not a real one, because I actually have to distinguish it in this case, to do all the dirty work for him, so he hasn't been affected by the chess formation because he hasn't actually done anything of it. The thunderstorm raged overhead, the shrieking wind like devils dragging their talons over the windows, rattling the latticework. A forking bolt of lightning threw their surroundings into sharp relief. You taught me? Emperor Tashinjin mumbled. Why don't I remember? I don't remember that at all. The trees creaked and swayed in the wind. Vengeful ghosts seemed to swarm over the mountain and through the courtyards. Chuaning's face was deathly pale as he watched Moran like a hawk. You don't remember anything. His heart drummed relentlessly in his chest. A brief silence. Then Moran answered him with a baffled question of his own. Anything about what? Oh, I know I shouldn't be focusing on Shimei right now, but I'm just thinking back to how tragic it had felt when Shimei supposedly had his lost his sight, and kind of how he said, "None of you understood me." And I thought that was such a beautiful, sad characterization of like someone who had always tried to please people and never truly felt understood, but hadn't been like actually evil or anything like that. And now I can't help but look back at it and just hate him for it, and it sucks because I really didn't want Shimei to be a villain. I think I suspected it from volume 1. I can't remember when I mentioned it the first time, but it's still such a disappointment that I don't know when I'm gonna get over it. Anyway. The drum halted. In that minute, fear broke through the shell at last. An all-consuming terror roared towards him, a dark tidal wave bearing down on the only person in the room who was truly awake. Chuaning's scalp was prickling. You forgot? How could he possibly forget? Not only had Moran said he wanted to write to his mother, he'd written more than 300 letters all told. He'd said he wanted to write 1,000, which he would burn during the Ghost Festival so they could reach his mother in the underworld. How could he forget 300 letters just like that? Chuaning's lips quivered as a terrifying thought rose in his mind. Do you remember what you said when you saw Tianwen for the first time? He asked hoarsely. What I said, repeated Moran. That was so long ago. How could I possibly remember something like that? You said you wanted a holy weapon just like it. Oh! Oh! Oh my word! Jingwei is actually a fulfillment of that wish, and we're only just finding out about it 8 volumes in. Great, thank you, while we're in the middle of all the pain. Zhuaning said, you wanted your own Tianwen. What would I want a Tianwen for? The drunken man asked mockingly. To murder people or to interrogate them? The earthworms, Chuaning murmured. Outside the Red Lotus Pavilion all those years ago, that tender youth had held up a oil-paper umbrella and said, and said to him cheerfully, "I can use it to save the earthworms." Time, I don't like it in the present. I know this is technically the past, but I don't like it in the present either. Lightning tore the sky into purple-edged shreds. There we go. And thunder cleaved the earth. Chuaning pressed his lips together, his dark eyes wavering, pupils contracting. He felt cold, bone-chillingly cold. Moran didn't touch Chuaning that night. After drinking himself drunk, he merely sat, blankly staring at the letters in his hands. At some point, he drifted off at the table, muttering under his breath, "What earthworms? There were no earthworms." A gust of wind blew the window open. Cold wind and rainwater rushed in, extinguishing several lamps near the sill and plunging the room into darkness. Chuaning stood beside Moran, teeth chattering, watching him as he slept. The unformed idea coalescing in his mind began to solidify. How could Moran fail to remember these parts of his past? Why would he willingly forget these innocent days of his youth? Was it because he was drunk? Was it a coincidence? Or had someone purposefully erased these memories of kindness from his heart? Oh, I hadn't considered that as a possibility. But it just feels strange because that would mean it would have had to happen. Either there's another figure that we don't know of who survived in the original timeline and was manipulating him, or this had happened before Shumei died in the original timeline. Which to think he was scheming with, well, not with, but that he was scheming against Moran even at that young of an age creeps me out so much. I kind of don't want to think about it. Mm. On the table, Tashin Jun muttered, "Cold." Chuaning's blood was thoroughly chilled. His entire body had gone numb. At this murmured complaint, he automatically walked over to the window. He pulled the shutters closed, blocking out the wind and rain, but he didn't immediately walk away. Still dazed, he pressed his forehead to the window frame, carved with bats and deers, his clenched knuckles white as jade. After a long while, he drew a wrinkled talisman from his robes, the rising dragon talisman. Chuaning's score was gone. Moran hadn't bothered to confiscate his old paper talismans, assuming he couldn't use any magic. He wasn't altogether wrong. Chuaning had to squeeze more than a dozen drops of blood from his bitten fingertips onto the talisman until the paper was nearly soaked, before the little dragon stirred sluggishly to life. As its weakly glowing form emerged from the talisman, it feebly raised its head. "Ah, Chuaning, long time no see." The little dragon could barely stand upright. After taking just a few steps on its flimsy dragon paws, it crumpled to the paper. "Why has it been so long since you've summoned this venerable one?" it asked, sounding hurt and confused. "Why do you provide this venerable one with such paltry amounts of spiritual chi?" It's really just chi, not even really spiritual energy. What's going on with you?" "It's a long story. There's too much to explain." Chuaning gently plucked the dragon from the talisman and placed it in his palm. I'd like to ask a favor. Ah, you only ever remember me when you need me. The little dragon wheezed, but its energy was tied to Chuaning's. It had no strength to spare for complaints. Head drooping, it said, "Go on. What can this venerable one do for you?" Chuaning carried the dragon over to Moran and placed it on the sleeping man's temple. He clenched his fists, nails digging into his palms as his complexion somehow grew paler still. "Please check if there are any strange spells on him," he asked. The boy who'd once been so easygoing and cheerful, who couldn't bear to see even an earthworm come to harm, had become a monster. As his Shizun, why had Chuaning never questioned this? He'd watched with his own eyes as his disciples slew Xu Zhengyong and Madame Wang, and then Jiangxi and Ye Wangxi, as he massacred Rufeng sect and crushed the bones of 1,000 beneath his heel. He'd watched Moran commit slaughter upon slaughter, blood streaming from his hands, his robes soaked in hot scarlet. Moran standing upon a pile of corpses, flashing him a hateful grin over his shoulder. He had grieved it all, but had he ever thought it strange? Moran had never been that kind of person before. The little dragon toiled over its paper, diligently sketching a spell diagram. Though Chuaning thought he had steeled himself for anything, the finished drawing stupefied him. An affection spell? Moran had been bewitched by an affection spell. The little dragon had exhausted its last ounce of energy. Its tiny paper form vanished in a puff of dark smoke and reappeared on the talisman. Chuaning clutched the diagram, his head ringing as if a rock slide had just crashed through his skull. He forced himself into calmness and looked over the drawing repeatedly. Something was wrong with the diagram of this affection spell. It was reversed from left to right. Okay. Obviously, it feels like that could just be that the affection spell has been modified, but like added to in a way that would make it more intense. But a part of me couldn't help wondering if maybe it's in the sense of the affection spell turning into a hate spell to force hate for Chuaning upon Moran. No, no. But I mean, that would confirm it. That would mean that this had been going on for years before Shimei had died. What I can't help but wonder is if maybe that would be a good linchpin, well, not linchpin, turning point, I guess. If they could figure it out in this timeline that Moran had had an affection spell placed on him, and free the Taishinjun currently in the current timeline as well from it, so that he can see the situation clearly and maybe come to their side to ultimately defeat Shimei. I mean, that would be quite the turn. And I think we would need that because Moran right now can't face up against both Shimei and himself. He isn't even strong enough to face up against himself. And he can't be defending from both sides while Chuaning is not even there to help him. So but the best way would be if they could turn one of them against the other and utilize that. Obviously, no spoilers, but yeah, that's currently kind of where my head is at. But yay, we survived the first chapter without crying. Chapter 249, Reality. No. For once, I actually would have preferred to go back into the dream. At least there wasn't rape going on in that one. Let's see. When Moran woke the next morning, he remembered little of what had happened after he'd started drinking the night before, but what Moran couldn't remember, Chuaning couldn't forget. After that day, he began indirectly probing Moran. He found that Moran had indeed lost many of his memories. Chuaning's anxiety compounded. After a long and arduous search, he uncovered a dusty medicine manual in Shizun Peak's library that identified the spell in question. Beneath the sunlight spilling in from the window, he read, "Flower of Eightfold Sorrows." That doesn't sound like an affection spell. His fingers brushed over the inked drawing in the book. Chuaning reached for the little dragon's diagram and laid the pages side by side. They were identical, a black heart easily mistaken for an affection spell. Only upon close inspection might one notice the affection spell's heart had a tiny spot of white space on its left side. The one had the same spot, but on the right. The paper dragon's spell diagram was meant to reflect the technique's effects, where this goo flower's effects, like those of an effect. Hold on, sorry. I totally read that wrong. Let's try that again. The paper dragon's spell diagrams were meant to reflect the technique's effects, were this goo flower's effects like those of an affection spell, but likewise reversed. The book he had dug up was an ancient text of the demon tribe, long abandoned in the corner of this deserted library, and unsurprising that Shimei might stumble upon it, I feel. He had some cursory knowledge of the script, but reading it was by no means straightforward. He waded through the text, a word at a time, a slow and painstaking process. With every sentence he understood, his alarm deepened. The flower of eightfold sorrow, a plant of the demon tribe. Chuaning's pale lips parted softly around the words. Legend has it that Guchen the Exalted. Why does it have to be him again? I know it's not actually his fault that any of this started. It's the fake Guchen's fault. So, now I've completely blanked on his name, but we know who it actually is. But brought this flower to the mortal world from the demon realm. Between the passages, a strange-looking seed was depicted, with a drop of blood and a wisp of smoke pictured alongside it. The seed is exceedingly difficult to cultivate. It must be nourished on demon blood for 10 years, then integrated into the souls of its chosen host to germinate. That's horrifying. That doesn't sound like something we could sort out in like a jiffy. Chuaning muttered, "It requires demon blood and a host soul to grow, but there shouldn't be any pure demons left in this world." Pure-blooded demons. Sorry, I don't know what I just said. Perhaps this account wasn't entirely correct or comprehensive. Do we know of a demon? Do we know? We knew of any encounters with demons before that heavenly rift that stole Shimei's life in the original timeline. So where would Shimei get that? Perhaps his account wasn't entirely correct or comprehensive. He continued reading. Painted on the silk was a human heart with a lush flower growing out of its right side. Next to this, in the intricate script of the demon tribe was written, "This demonic flower cannot grow in soil or water. The presence or absence of sun is immaterial. Only a human heart can sustain it." Now I suddenly have the concern that it might also be planted in our current day Moran, but I feel like it might have died because of Moran's emotions. Like, I don't know. Let me stop speculating. I'm gonna break my brain. Chuaning blinked in surprise. This blossom could only flourish when planted in a person's heart. The further he read, the greater his horror grew. After the flower of eightfold sorrow was sown in the heart of a host, its effects took hold in 3 stages. In the first, the host would display an inclination towards melancholy and tend to assume the worst of others' intentions, but their behavior would be mostly unchanged otherwise. At the same time, the recollection of their happiest memories would gradually begin to fade. Although the flower of eightfold sorrow was difficult to extract from a host completely, if discovered at this stage, its influence could be suppressed. In the best case, the flower would go dormant and no longer affect the host. And if the flower went dormant because he was surrounded by love and found that everyone cared for him, could it be like fed and reawakened again if he lost the love of his life and all the people that he cared about and thought all of it was his fault? Just asking for a friend. If the flower was not detected during this period, it would take root within the host and progress to the second stage. This could take as long as a decade, though it could be accelerated by a traumatic event. This stage was marked by a rapid loss of the memories associated with innocence, kindness, and hope. The host would ruminate on the obstacles and setbacks they'd encountered, as well as any mistreatment or humiliation they'd suffered. There were 8 sorrows in life, and it was for these the flower was and it was for these that the flower was named: birth, death, aging, illness, unfulfilled wishes, clashes with enemies, separation from loved ones, and the worldly trappings of the self. The host would dwell on all these, etching their sufferings into their marrow. By the time he came to this passage, Chuaning's face was white as frost. Was this not exactly what had happened to Moran? He'd forgotten the dreams of his youth, forgotten every word of the letters he'd written. Even his memories of his own mother were no longer clear. He read on to the description of the third stage. The host would become bloodthirsty and violent, increasingly irrational. They would seek to avenge all the sufferings they had endured 1,000 times over. A figure swam before Chuaning's eyes. Moran, in Rufang's ecstasy of blood, face distorted in a sneer. Moran, funneling spiritual energy into his hand, thrust his bare fingers into a cultivator's chest. Blood sprayed as he pulled out the cultivator's heart and crushed it in his grip. He was surrounded by the dead and dying, the air thick with cries for mercy, but Moran threw his head back and laughed, his eyes flashing with a frenzied light. The only thing he said over and over was, "Beggars can't be choosers. Beggars can't be choosers." Oh, I don't think that will come back to haunt us. Not in this way, at least. He was ruthless and deranged, barely human. How had Moran come to this? In the past, Chuaning might have had fleeting moments of doubt, but they had been easily brushed aside. The flower of eightfold sorrows acted gradually, its effects deepening imperceptibly over time. Just as the text described, its violence wasn't senseless or unfounded. This demonic seed magnified the host's own grievances and desires. In other words, those grievances and desires belonged indisputably to Moran. No one else was responsible for them. Okay, I need a moment regard to this because I'm feeling very torn. I was just about to say, I don't know if I like this because it takes responsibility for Moran's actions away from him. But then Meat Bun was like, oh no, but all of this is still his fault. And I'm like, yes, I agree with you, but also let's not forget that someone did that to him, and he probably wouldn't have acted on them had that not been planted, planted in his heart, and all the good thing in his life erased and overshadowed by it. So I'm feeling very torn about it, because on the one hand I don't think it takes away the responsibility that Moran has for his actions, and yet I do think that um, it might lessen some of the responsibility by a marginal amount. Um, and it makes me wonder if somehow, though I cannot think how Shimei would have done it, but that somehow Shimei did that to Shuangling as well, because it feels strange to me that in the first lifetime Xu Shuangling died without any action, and yet in this one he was inflamed in very much the same way that Moran was. But how would Shimei have had access to him? That's what's kind of getting to me. Okay, we are surprisingly not crying yet today. I don't want to jinx it, but I'm very happy that the first hour was spent without crying, at least. So I know that I started late, but I'm gonna take my 10-minute tea break now, and then we'll be on for the next hour, and we'll see how we feel at that point. Hi guys, sorry, I realized I never said what time I would be back, but we're back. I think it was more or less one, 10 minutes, sorry, but why is my brain so slow today? Hi, I'm so sorry if we missed you, but I hope you sleep well, because it seems you're tired. Um, yeah, I'm sorry for all the spoilers, considering you never read past volume 1. I don't know if you're following what everything that has happened up until this point, because there's been so much. Like, I feel like I've forgotten half of what has happened, and yeah, I don't know. Anyway, let us face another few pages. Let's see how it goes for the next hour, and then we shall decide if I'm brave enough for another hour of this tonight. Um, I don't want to speak too soon, but maybe, maybe we can still hold out hope that I can continue this live. It's okay, I just put the stream on in the background and I don't mind spoilers. Okay, great. That's good. As long as you enjoyed it, that's all that matters. Okay. Um, right, I kind of just stopped in the middle of the page, so sorry about that. Hey! Um, hold on, sorry, I missed these. Let me quickly read it before we go on. Hi Janae, how are you? I wanted to tell you the last week on Gay Watch channels we were reading a certain scene in READALONG volume 6, and Yusuf mentioned that you changed the sentence to something else very creative, like that you will climax on my abs. Oh, right. Oh my goodness. I remember he mentioned it, but I couldn't. I thought that was what was written in the book. I didn't realize I said that. My bad. Oh goodness. Oh no. Okay. Well, I'm glad she enjoyed it. At least I have yet to get to those live streams, because since I'm reading this already, I'm just like I can't go back to those yet, because it's just gonna kill me. Um, too much tragedy is not good. Okay, that's good. Okay, are we ready to go back into the not so fun things? I wish we could go back to the climaxing on the absolute human unit. That would be so much more fun. Um, where were we? Okay, so it's all Moran's fault, right? Moran had truly wanted to massacre Rufang's sect, to rule all under heaven. He truly hated and resented Chuaning, but these emotions should have lasted a fleeting instant, or else been buried and forgotten as flights of fancy. The flower of eightfold sorrow dug out every scrap of hatred hidden in the crevices of his heart and made them real. Onlookers would think the flower's host insane, but the host's hatred would appear justified. Their personality, too, would undergo no dramatic shift, at least not to the point of seeming like a different person altogether. Those around them would inevitably assume it was their hatefulness that had twisted them, not some outside enchantment. No one would have had reason to suspect that Moran had been implanted with that flower of eightfold sorrow. By the time anyone might have discovered it, the enchantment would likely have progressed to the second or third stage, at which point it was impossible to excise or even suppress the flower. When he read the entire entry, Chuaning sank into thought for a long time. What did he feel? Surprise? Regret? Rage? fear? Or was it grief? He didn't know. I mean, just get a helping of all of the above, why don't you? Curled up and fully looking like a donut, that is magnificent. I hope she's living her best life. Okay. Ah, wrong way around. He sat on the dilapidated floorboards in the long-neglected library. The afternoon sunlight streamed in, but it seemed unable to warm his skin. Sitting in his nest of scrolls and volumes, he felt as if someone stood behind him, a person he could neither see nor touch. They were laughing quietly, infiltrating his world like a vengeful spirit, watching his every movement from behind a curtain. He lowered his head to reread that sentence inked upon the silk cloth. I'm just realizing if this was, and I mean, I don't think it could be anyone else, but if this was Shimei who planted that, he literally he's literally the reason why Chuaning ended up in the state that he ended up in, and he's taking no personal responsibility for it. He's like, oh no, I would not have mistreated Chuaning like that, but I fully facilitated someone else treating him like that. The irony. We are on, how should I put it? Chuaning finding out about the Eight Fool's Flower of Sorrows. I might have misquoted that name. The Flower of Eight Fool Sorrows, there we go, other way around. Um, they were laughing quietly, infiltrating his world like a vengeful spirit, watching his every movement from behind a curtain. He lowered his head and reread that sentence inked upon the silk cloth. Although the flower of Eight Fool Sorrows is difficult to uproot, during the first stage it can be suppressed if discovered in time. If suppressed successfully, the host's heart will remain unchanged. Chuaning recited this sentence to himself many times over. He was startled to discover a few splotches of wetness on the silk slowly soaking into the fabric. He extended an ice-cold hand, thinking to wipe away those drops, but before his fingers touched the silk he flinched back. Instead, his hand reached up to cover his damp, quivering lashes. It was he who was no good. It was he who was at fault. No, it wasn't. He had always been too aloof, prizing his reputation above all else. He'd never been willing to initiate difficult conversations. If discovered in time, their heart will remain unchanged. But he hadn't noticed anything in all those years. The man they called Yuhung of the night sky, the Beidou immortal, had failed to discover the demonic flower planted in his own disciples' hearts. Because Chuaning was so withdrawn, so bad with words, Moran had been forced onto this lonely road. He had walked into an endless night, into a bloody ocean of vengeance. How could Chuaning have the gall to act as his elder? How could he bear to hear Moran call him Shizun, if discovered in time? The sentence was like a nightmare echoing in his ears, like a curse. He felt as if a thicket of brambles was stabbing into his spine, as if a sharp bone was lodged in his throat, as if his heart was jumping out of his chest. He didn't deserve to be Moran's teacher. Looking back now, how long had something been wrong with Moran? They'd spent so much time together, not just a matter of 1 or 2 years. Moran had once been a bashful yet brilliant boy. Bit by bit, darkness had swallowed him. Crimson rain had soaked him to the bone. And Chuane, as a Shifu, hadn't realized that anything was amiss until today. Not until it was already too late to turn back. Too late to change a thing. Chuaning's heart was tarnished, his body unmoored, his pain and regret all-consuming. He didn't deserve to be Moran's teacher. Chuaning didn't know how he'd pulled himself together that day, how he'd managed to leave the library and walk into Shizun Peak's silent bamboo forest. He didn't know how he made his way back to the Red Lotus Pavilion. Beneath the blooming wisteria vines, everything was a mess. He sat by himself until the brilliant days turned into golden sunsets. Someone walked into his field of view. It was a man's figure, stately and proud, with broad shoulders and a narrow waist. He strolled over the sun-dappled ground, a gleaming wine cup in his hand, as he made his way towards the lotus pond. Chuaning, lost in his thoughts, couldn't immediately place who he was, or when he was. In his eyes, the image of that tall, handsome man overlapped with that of the youth from his memories. Barely a month after Moran became his disciple, he had cheerfully hurried over to the Red Lotus Pavilion to look for Chuaning. He was slightly out of breath from running. His cheeks flushed, eyes startlingly bright. In his hand he carried a little clay jar in a sling of woven bamboo. Shizun, I tried some really delicious wine at the bottom of the mountain. I've brought some back. Will you drink with me? You haven't received any assignments yet? Said Chuaning. Where do you get the money? Moran grinned. I borrowed from Uncle. Why go to such trouble? 'Cause Shizun likes me. Moran smiled and held out a jar in both hands. I like Shizun too. This hurts. This hurts so much. The fear that I am suddenly feeling is that Shimei used that one bowl of wonton soup to be the carrier for the flowers to be implanted in Moran's heart. Because we don't really know, like, it hasn't really been explained how it gets into his heart. I would assume he would have to consume the seed. Though obviously it could just magically be implanted in some way while he's asleep. But I can't let go of the idea that because Meat Bun has no chill in any other circumstances or situations ever, she will probably use something that we see as very dear to us, a very cute, significant moment between Moran and Chuaning that will now forever be tainted by the knowledge that that was the one moment where Shimei implanted the demon seed into Moran's chest. And that's also when Moran's grievances with Chuaning really started to spiral. So that's why I'm kind of like narrowing in on that. But I hope I'm wrong, because I don't want that. I don't want it. We have enough pain. I have enough pain from this freaking series for a lifetime. Okay, let me just quickly catch up with the stream. Hold on, I feel like I missed something here. Do you guys need the chapter title? It's reality chapter. Let me see, I feel like it was 249. And we are currently on page 69, for anyone who is wondering. Yeah, no, Shimei definitely, unfortunately, seems to be that, and I hate that for us. Poor Chuaning, feeling bad for not paying attention to Moran. This hurts more when you think about Moran saying Shizun, pay attention to me. Thanks for that, I had not yet thought of that. But yeah, that hurts. Okay, let's keep going. Let's try and survive. Chuaning still remembered the awkwardness and embarrassment he'd felt then. This young man expressed himself so ardently. Chuaning didn't want to reciprocate. He feared reaching out would get him burnt. He flicked his sleeves and replied curtly, What does liking me have to do with anything? Don't say such things. Oh, alright. Moran scratched his head. But if I eat or drink something good, I'll definitely think of Shizun. I'll want Shizun to taste it too. Chuaning paused. I've never had wine before. This made Moran laugh. Then you've gotta try at least once. Who knows, maybe you'll be able to drink everyone under the table. Chuaning pressed his lips together and took the jar. Removing the stopper, he took a tentative whiff. His eyes widened slightly. Does it smell good? Huh, come on, take a sip. I did not realize that Moran was the reason why Chuaning learned to drink. That's a new bit of lore that was just unlocked. So Chuaning swallowed a mouthful of wine. It was strong and heady, its rich, complex flavor flooding his tongue. Chuaning couldn't help taking a second sip. Not bad. What's it called? Moran broke into a grin. This is Pear Blossom white wine. It was the first wine Chuaning ever tasted. Pear Blossom white, he repeated softly. A fitting name. Moran was delighted. If Shizun likes it, as soon as I start taking missions and getting paid, I'll buy it for you every day. This hurts. Chuaning took another sip of wine. Expression perfectly neutral, he turned his phoenix eyes upon Moran. Then you'll never manage to build up any savings. I don't need to, Moran cheerfully replied. I'll use all my money to buy things for Shizun and for Uncle and Auntie. I just have so many feelings right now, and if I voice them, I'm gonna cry, so we're just gonna keep going. Chuaning didn't answer, but he could feel a tiny crack forming in his heart, into which sweetness trickled. He didn't want Moran to notice his happiness, lest he get the impression that the Yuheng elder could be bribed with a simple cup of wine. He gripped the jar and continued to drink as impassively as ever. This chatty new disciple often flummoxed Chuaning. To everyone else, his cool indifference was like a formidable wall, but this boy happily clambered over the barrier and was now rubbing the back of his head and looking around in apparent unconcern. Maybe he was an idiot, Chuaning mused. Entirely oblivious, Moran was contemplating what sorts of presents would best demonstrate his respect for his teacher. Shizun, do you like Osmuta's cake? What about Lotus Crisps? Sweet as lotus root? Cheeks dimpling deeply, Moran laughed. So Shizun has a sweet tooth. This time Chuaning was silent. It belatedly occurred to him how his penchant for sweets must appear at odds with his icy demeanour. He took another gulp of wine, a bit too enthusiastic in his irritation. Although the wine was smooth and sweet, it was still quite strong. He choked. Oh no, him and his thin face is not gonna like that. Moran enabling poor drinking habits since childhood. I mean, it's very on brand, I feel. The more Meat Bun shows us how sweet he was, the more my heart breaks. And I think what's really getting to me, obviously he is being super sweet and that's so endearing and sad. But what gets to me is seeing how similar this timeline's adult him is to how he was as a child, and realizing how much was lost during the first timeline because of how things turned out. Chuaning valued his dignity above all, and choking on wine was too great a humiliation for him to bear. He held back his coughing, but the burning itch in his throat made his eyes and nose redden against his will. In the future, I'll bring back all the sweets for Shizun. Moran was still waxing poetic about his grand plans which were becoming increasingly far-fetched. I'll put together a book of the yummiest food from all over, and then take a trip with Shizun to try everything. And then, I mean, isn't this exactly kind of what he did with the letters, while Chuaning was unconscious in the current timeline? Where he was like writing, okay, this restaurant is really good, I'll take you here when you're alive, all of that. Turning to look at Chuaning, his laughter turned into a hiccup of shock. Shizun, are you okay? Chuaning blinked through watery eyes. Couldn't it be too ridiculous for a teacher to choke on the wine his disciple had given him? Stay strong, don't cough, he thought to himself, but this only caused his eyes to mist over and their ends to grow visibly redder. Did I say something wrong? Moran asked helplessly. Shizun, why do you look like you're about to cry? Goodness. Chuaning glared at him, his lashes quivering with silent rage, but Moran was oblivious to Chuaning's ire. Struck by realization, he asked, voice going soft, Shizun, is it because no one ever bought sweets for you before? At this, Chuaning's fury multiplied. Oh no! Oh! Actually, Moran continued heedlessly, there was a time I couldn't get enough to eat and almost starved. I'm sorry, I should be laughing, but like the non sequiturness of that sentiment, I get where he's coming from, but at the same time, it's like the rest of the situation is so unserious, and then you just have Moran randomly bringing up the fact that he has a super tragic past. Okay, sorry, I don't know why that was so funny to me. Okay, I'm kind of judging myself right now. There was a time I couldn't get enough to eat and almost starved to death. I ran into Xiao Gogo, who fed me some sweets Pongli. I like sweets too, but no one's ever bought them for me either. The boy had a real gift for projection. Somehow he'd convinced himself Chuaning's eyes were red because he was greatly moved. Moran grabbed Chuaning's hand. This was totally outside Chuaning's expectations. In all his years, other than touching others' hands to teach them spells, he'd only ever held hands with Huai Zhui as a child. For this new disciple to grab his hand without warning or inhibition gave him quite a shock. He was on the verge of blowing his top when he looked up and saw his little disciple's handsome, naive face. Oh my goodness. Okay. Shizun, said Moran, all earnestness. Once I make a name for myself, I'll get so many sweets for you, mark my words. His eyes shone with tenderness. I'll buy you all the best candy. My mom always told me I have to repay kindness. Oh, hit me where it hurts, why don't you? Moran had no schooling, and he'd grown up in an entertainment house. His word choice was a bit strange, and sometimes even laughably awkward. All Chuaning knew was that Moran's passion had scalded him. He glanced at Moran, then lowered his lashes without a word. As the wine's sting dissipated, Chuaning gingerly cleared his throat. Don't babble on like this, he said flatly. Also, a spark of curiosity. I want to ask you something. Shizun can ask me anything. Chuaning hesitated, then asked with some embarrassment. There were so many people at the heaven-piercing tower that day. Why did you pick me? Oh my goodness, is he gonna say because you're beautiful, or is he gonna say something else that's gonna make it worse? Chuaning about to dig his own grave to hide from embarrassment. Very much. He is the definition of a person who would do that. The boy Moran opened his mouth and said, but at that moment, Chuaning's reverie was broken. Ta Xinjun stood facing Chuaning, wine jar in hand. Seeing Chuaning lost in thought, he reached out and poked him in the forehead. What's wrong? Chuaning's pupils slowly refocused upon the Moran before him. This man's complexion was white as bone, his eyes narrowed in a predatory leer. He was handsome as ever, but his good looks couldn't hide the violence etched into his bones. No longer was he that brilliant youth from those earlier days. All those things were already in the past. Suddenly, Chuaning felt so very tired. In the long years of his imprisonment, he'd never known such debilitating confusion and pain. He was impossibly conflicted. He had no idea how to face the man before him. He turned his face away. A large, cool hand gripped his chin, forcing him to look forward once more. Chuaning's phoenix eyes reflected the last rosy blush on the horizon, the dense shadows of twilight, and Ta Xinjun's glowering face. Oh. I assumed it was Chuaning, but I can't remember if we ever got a confirmation of it. So currently I'm still waiting to either get reconfirmation or find out the truth. But I feel like we did find out that it was. Didn't Moran remember that it was? Like he was like, oh, so the person who has been with me through all the important moments of my life was that. I feel like we've read that. Now that's gonna bother me. But one thing that I kind of had. Okay, yeah. So I'm pretty sure that I'm not making that up. That we had that entire scene play out. I don't think I'm creative enough to make that up. I feel like that had happened. Yes, that's okay. Okay, so yes, great. Okay, we're all on the same page right now, I think. Um, sorry, what I wanted to say is, I kind of forgot that we're currently technically in Chuaning's dreams slash past life memories, in the sense that Chuaning is actually gonna be able to recall this once he wakes up, which means there is still maybe a grain of hope for him being able to figure out something to sort out the new version of Ta Xinjun that has entered this timeline. Because I was like, that it's a disaster that they will have to find this out from scratch, but they won't. They have this knowledge now because Chuaning's past self had it. But the question is there a way that they could fix it, or maybe not fix it, but at least suppress it, destroy it in a way that wouldn't immediately kill Ta Xinjun. I know that the spell guidelines say that it can only be suppressed or removed during the first stage, but I feel like there are a lot of other things that have caveats in this series, so this could have a caveat. Why not? I might be hoping for too much. Yeah, the flower in Ta Xinjun, in the current Ta Xinjun's chest, who also has it. We're not worrying about Moran right now. I don't want to think about the fact that he probably also still has it, and it's only been suppressed because of all the good things that he and Chuaning have experienced in this timeline. Okay, anyway. A large, cool hand gripped his chin, forcing him to look forward once more. Chuaning's phoenix eyes reflected the last rosy blush on the horizon, the dense shadows of twilight, and Ta Xinjun's glowering face. You're still angry? Chuaning closed his eyes and didn't reply for a long beat. No, he said hoarsely. Your fever broke. Before Chuaning could answer, Moran released his jaw and placed a palm against Chuaning's forehead. It's gone, he muttered under his breath. Helping himself to a seat, Moran broke the seal on the wine jar and continued. Now that you've gotten over your fever and your hissy fit, you'll drink with this venerable one tonight. Chuaning couldn't speak. There was an invisible mastermind standing behind Moran. Despite Sishan Peak's outward serenity, dangers lurked around every corner. He couldn't afford to draw enemies' attention. He couldn't reveal a single thing. Moran poured the wine. Pearl Blossom White, he said carelessly. Your favorite. Thanks for that. Chuaning's thoughts stalled at the fragrance of the wine wafted up a diaphanous barrier between worlds. It was the first wine he'd ever tried, a memory he could never forget. He raised his eyes, watching the man pour wine. Moran surely wouldn't remember that anymore. Chuaning's chest ached dully, and his throat stung. He raised his cup and downed it in one draught. The wine was fury. After such a mighty gulp, of course he would choke. He found he no longer cared a whit. In fact, he embraced it as though grabbing onto a piece of driftwood amidst pounding rapids. He coughed violently until the rims of his eyes turned red, and finally until hot tears slipped out from between his damp lashes. Ryan paused, his eyes momentarily widening in alarm. He quickly schooled his expression, lips curving into a methodical grin. Shizun, what's wrong? What are you crying for? Chuaning pulled himself together. It didn't matter how painful or unbearable things were. It didn't matter that he knew the truth. There was nothing he could do. As long as he hadn't extracted the flower of eightfold sorrows or found the villain behind the scenes, as long as he was still alive, he had to endure his situation. He had to pretend ignorance, to feign hatred and fury. He closed his eyes and forced his spine to straighten. The wine, he rasped. The wine's too strong? Moran asked slowly. In lieu of answering, Chuaning drank another cup. The wine burned a trail of fire to his belly. Why did you pick me? His misty eyes drifted open, gazing into the distance. Amid the evening haze, the heaven-piercing tower rose as tall and regal as ever, but the youth who'd once grinned and replied, Because I like you. You look the gentlest. Oh, right, that was it. It wasn't the beautiful, it was the gentlest, which was super ironic, but it still hurts. It was gone forever. Thanks. In life, there were eight sorrows: birth, death, aging, and illness. Separation from loved ones, unfulfilled wishes, clashes with enemies, the worldly trappings of the self. Thus eternal regret was born. There had been so many opportunities for him to uncover the truth, but he'd missed them all. Now that he finally saw how Moran's heart had been corrupted, he was hobbled. He couldn't do a thing. That night, Chuaning watched Moran sleep beside him. His once innocent face was shrouded behind cloud shadows, his skin white as paper. Chuaning had hated him, resented him. When Moran had turned his sword on him, his blood had run cold. When Moran had forced him to submit on his knees, his heart had withered. But in that boundless night, beneath the gloomy bed canopy, Chuaning felt that, in the face of the truth, his hatred and resentments, his deadened heart, were so very ridiculous. A good flower had been planted in Moran's heart. None of the things he'd done reflected his true intentions. The almighty Emperor Tashin Jin had long been shackled and bound. And although Chuaning was his Shizun, he was completely powerless. He didn't know how many eyes watched him from behind. He couldn't tell anyone the truth. He couldn't show Moran the slightest hint of compassion or warmth. He had to keep hating and resenting, had to keep his heart walled off and numb. Deep in the night, behind the curtains in the still and silent, Wushan Palace, Chuaning waited for Moran to fall into sound slumber. Only then could he sit up and touch Moran's bloodless face. Only then could he whisper ever so softly, "I'm sorry. It was your Shifu who didn't protect you properly." Yeah, and that's like the sad thing, because I'm realizing that was probably a secret other thing that he was thinking about as he took his life at the start of the novel, like at the start of the novel as a whole, not the volume. But it's interesting because I wonder if there is a solution to this heart flower demon thing. Sorry, I know there's a proper name, my brain is blanking. Because I feel like Chuaning's death somehow broke the hold that flower had on Moran both times. The first time in the original timeline where he suddenly kind of came to his senses after Chuaning's death, and again in the current timeline when Shimei was supposed to die but it was Chuaning instead. Yeah, because I can't imagine why it would be an exception, because I mean, they just said it, one of the 8 sorrows is the death of a loved one, so technically Chuaning's death should just amplify it, but both times it seems to have the opposite effect, so maybe I'm thinking too deeply into it, but that'd be great. Not that I want Chuaning to die a third time so that things can be resolved, but at least then it would mean there is some kind of hope for them to get the current Tashinjun back to his senses. I don't know. I just don't know how we defeat Tashinjun and Shimei at the same time. Okay. We will read as much of the next chapter as we can, but I'm actually quite apprehensive about it because this hasn't been like a fun live stream in the normal sense of, like, it's not Disabled Tyrant's Beloved Pet Fish fun, but it's been, I haven't been crying, which I really appreciate, and I want to keep it that way, so I'm kind of scared to continue reading tonight, but we'll just go. Okay, chapter 250, Obsession, Joy. I'm the one who didn't protect you properly. I let you become someone else's pawn. I let you become a monstrous tyrant. No one knows who you really are. No one knows you were once kind and innocent. No one knows how you once fretted over the earthworms you couldn't save on a rainy day. How you once smiled brilliantly before a pond of lotuses in full bloom. Everyone thinks you're a cold-blooded and heartless man. They don't know you once scratched your head and said bashfully, It's not like I can do anything special, but when I was little, I didn't have a place to stay. When I have money to spare in the future, I'll build lots of houses so people like me have somewhere to live. Wouldn't that be nice? Ow. Everyone hates you for being a ruthless butcher, but they don't know you once told me, Shizun, I want a holy weapon like Tian Wen. It can tell lies from truth, and it can save lives. Everyone curses your existence, wishes you'd meet a terrible end. And even though I know the truth now, I still can't give you your dignity back. Perhaps Moran was sensitive to being watched, even while sleeping. His eyelids twitched. Before Chuaning could react, his eyes snapped open. You. Their gazes met. What are you looking at? Chuaning's emotions were strained to the breaking point. He didn't know how to answer, so he flipped over to avoid Moran's eyes. Nothing. Moran didn't reply. After a beat, Chuaning found himself drawn into a heated embrace, a broad, firm chest pressed to his back. In the darkness, Chuaning opened his eyes. The canopy fluttered idly before him, while Tashinjin's body was warm against his back. "You're so cold," Moran remarked. His tone was indifferent, whether out of scorn or indolence. It was hard to say. "But you're sweating." He nuzzled his face into the crook of Chuaning's neck and inhaled. "Did you have a nightmare?" Moran laughed softly, his words slow with drowsiness. "I can smell the fear on you. That's not good. Once you start being able to smell things most people can't smell, that's not a good sign. I hope he's speaking metaphorically." Chuaning said nothing, but he could feel himself trembling, not out of fear, but because he was about to shatter under the weight of his pain and guilt. He summoned all his strength, willing himself to keep calm. At last, Tashinjin's interest seemed to wane. Moran yawned, gradually growing more alert. He sniffed at Chuaning's shoulders and temples, then hummed in satisfaction. "Come to think of it, why do you smell like flowers even when you're sweating?" He sounded amused. "You're like a plant spirit that's cultivated into a human." "Thanks for reminding me." Such ridicule would usually earn him a furious retort, but on this night Moran waited, yet got no reaction at all. Bemused, he sat up and flipped Chuaning onto his back. Moran climbed on top of him, his solid bulk pinning Chuaning to the bed. When their eyes met, they left no room for anything but each other. The hall was lit by only a single guttering candle, a slight blurring as it wound its way through the layers of gauze. In the gloom, Moran stared down his nose at Chuaning's handsome features. Those sword-straight brows remained forbidding above his upturned phoenix eyes and regal nose, as haughty and proud as they ever had been. Yet for some reason there was something queer about his expression tonight. Mm. Wait, where are we? When I catch you, I swear. Oh. Mm. Sorry, I completely lost my place. What's wrong with you? Moran reached out and cupped Chuaning's cheek. He felt a tremor ripple through his fingertips. The man beneath him closed his eyes, suppressing an onslaught of unknowable emotions. Moran found himself jolted fully awake by his own arousal. Whether it was Chuaning's knitted brows, or his pale, delicate lips, or that face like brittle porcelain, everything fed the burning hunger in his chest, stroking his urge to conquer. Stroking his urge to conquer. I mean, it could be stroking it as well, who knows? Even so, a gnawing sense of unease stayed Moran's hand. "Seriously, what's wrong with you?" Chuaning opened his eyes, irises glimmering unsteadily beneath lowered lashes. He had no outlet for any of his pain and frustration. At last he said hoarsely, "How did the two of us come to this?" Oh, silence. If I could have stopped you earlier, would things be different now? Moran didn't answer. He found Chuaning's question laughable. After all, he'd triumphed over Chuaning so long ago. He'd forced Chuaning to wed him, made him his consort, turned him into his plaything. All this was set in stone. What would possess Chuaning to suddenly ask such outlandish questions? Wushan Palace was deserted, save for that pair of adversaries lying naked together in bed. The soothing smell of flowers drifted in through the window, dulling Moran's desire to snarl at this insubordinate man. He'd always had far more patience for his consort Chu than his empress. And yet no reflection is ever to be had in this lifetime. He peered down at Chuaning's pained expression with renewed interest. The burning itch in his heart sent heat radiating through his chest like a tiny flame. He usually wasn't one to joke, but now he said languidly, "If Wanning had discovered sooner that this venerable one intended to take the throne, how would you have stopped me?" Tashinjun's fingers trailed downward. Voice alluringly husky, he drawled, "With your body?" An inscrutable mixture of emotions flitted through Chuaning's eyes. Moran's gaze darkened. After a moment, he swore under his breath. He was powerless to resist any manner of temptation from Chuaning, intentional or not. There was no warning or foreplay. Like a beast in heat, Moran only lifted one of Chuaning's willowy legs and swiftly thrust forward. Are we ready, guys? His opening was still slick from the last time they'd made love, and his body seemed to remember the sensation of it. Moran slid in easily. Both of them couldn't help a low groan. Chuaning's eyes were misty with unshed tears. He looked at Moran's broad chest, at his handsome face suffused with fervent arousal. The lovely shape of his full lips parted slightly around his sharp gasps of pleasure. The 8 sorrows, eternal regret, all of these were born of desire. If not for their influence, could this broken body of his still rouse Moran's passion? Wait, so is Chuaning thinking that Moran only desires him because of the effect that the flower has on his heart? That he wouldn't have actually felt that way had the flower not been planted there? Huh. That's a new thing to be paranoid about from Chuaning's perspective. He didn't know. As he and Moran twined their limbs between the sheets, Chuaning's heart tied itself into knots. He couldn't muster the strength to struggle as he usually did. Moran seemed to find the strangeness of his reactions all the more enticing. Or perhaps it was simply because Chuaning felt even hotter inside than usual from his fever. "I thought you said the fever broke." Moran gathered Chuaning in his arms as he buried himself greedily into his pliant body, kissing Chuaning's lips over and over. He gripped Chuaning's but then raised one of Chuaning's lips, snapping his own hips faster and harder. Great. Chuaning's emotions were in tatters, and his usual self-control was nowhere to be found. His throat bobbed, low moans leaking unbidden from his lips. This thrilled Moran. Tangled within the dishevelled bedding, his laboured breaths were low and sensual. "Is it here?" he rasped. After all the time he'd taken him, Moran should have been intimately familiar with Chuaning's most sensitive spots, but Chuaning's willpower was such that he rarely made any noise in bed. Moran was not completely certain. He shifted angles and positions several times, gazing down at Chuaning's frowning face each time. Where does it feel best? When I thrust into you, which is going with that. Chuaning's world was in shambles. He heard Moran whisper questions into his ear, kissing him, his breath heavy and achingly urgent, as inescapable as sorry, let's try this word again. Tempestuous downpour, there we go. I know words, I promise. For the first time, he felt as though he was duckweed floating in a vast river, unable to grasp anything or chart his own course, unable to change a thing. This book in a nutshell. This series in a nutshell. He had never been as helpless as he was on that night. Though Chuaning said nothing, from the trembling of his limbs and the look in his eyes, Moran could tell which position overwhelmed him most. His motions were sharp and forceful, lighting up those nerves within Chuaning with every thrust. At first he bit his lip and stayed silent. Moran began to move with renewed vigor. Sorry, why do I have to read this? How do I read this without reading it? Yeah, no, we're just gonna take the plunge, pun not intended. His ball slapped loudly against Chuaning's ass. Fluid seeped from where they joined, making a mess of the sheets. Moran grabbed his jaw, his hips never stopped their movements as his lips sought Chuaning's, capturing his mouth in another ravenous kiss. Chuaning's eyes welled with tears. He tried to, wanted to, resist, but for some reason, with that kiss, his willpower evaporated. Helpless, he groaned and panted to the rhythm of Moran's conquest, grabbing at the sheets beneath him as if they were pieces of his shattered pride. That hurts. Okay. But Moran was relentless. Chuaning's legs were shaking. His opening was a sloppy mess. Thanks for that. He couldn't hold back the whines and soft moans that escaped his lips as Moran pounded into him with unbridled ferocity. Chuaning lost himself completely, spread his legs wide, toes curling, gasping uncontrollably under the onslaught. I am not copying what is written there. Moran's eyes grew darker still. The louder and more desperate Chuaning's cries, the harder Moran slammed into him. In the chaos of their joining, the bed frame creaked in protest, and the pillows tumbled to the ground. Neither of them spared a thought for their surroundings. Their love-making was too engrossing, almost soul-stirring. They made such a racket that the guards on duty could scarcely look at Chuaning the next day without blushing, their gazes furtive and with prudent curiosity. Oh no. As if everything else wasn't bad enough with poor Chuaning's pride. When Moran at last came inside him, it sent Chuaning careening over the edge. The sheets were soaked, the air heavy with musk. In all the years he'd been Moran's prisoner, it was the first time Chuaning had come just from Moran's absolute unit, without the use of any aphrodisiacs. Dazed, he heard Moran say, his voice a low rumble, "It's inevitable that we came to this. Do you know why?" I don't want to know why. You guys had like a somewhat pleasant, if still somewhat unconsensual, yeah, that was the word I was looking for, time together. And I don't want you to ruin it, because we are grasping at straws at this point, okay? When Chuaning said nothing, Moran continued. Because I've wanted to sleep with you for ages. He ran his fingers through Chuaning's long, inky hair. I hated that pretentious, indifferent look on your face. No matter what I did, you never had a single good word to say about it. Chuaning's lashes quivered. Moran's words were like a sharp thorn in his side. Moran had been the ultimate victor, yet he somehow sounded like a jilted bride as he murmured resentfully into Chuaning's ear. No matter how well I did, how hard I worked, you never spared me a glance. No, that's not true. There was once warmth between us. We shared a jar of wine in the garden. We huddled beneath an umbrella in the rain. But you've forgotten it all, and I can't remind you it happened anymore. The next merch I'm making is just gonna be an owl with an exclamation point on it at this rate. I can't even speak anymore. The scene does show a shift in the relationship, to me at least, because of this. Yeah, Chuaning knows the truth now, and things seem a bit different. Yeah, but the sad thing for me is I don't know how long Moran's noticing of the difference is gonna last before he deludes himself back into the usual state of hatred. Okay. Don't you see? You're only lying obediently beneath me because I snapped your bones and pulled out your claws. Moran pressed a kiss to Chuaning's lips, a manic edge rising in his voice. I had to become Emperor Tashin Jin to abuse and torment you, to trample you underfoot. His spent length stopped within Chuaning. It's so thick with Raoul. Thanks for that. I don't mind going to hell for the sin of lust if it means I can see you like this right now, Moran said softly. Look, in any other context, I might joke like, get you a man who would go to hell for you, but not in this context, okay? Get you a man who would go to hell and back for you. That's the one we like. For such a tantalizing sight, it's worth every torment. He stroked a hand over Chuaning's hair, his length still buried to the hilt in him. That night seemed to stir something in Moran. Afterward, he developed a habit of refusing to pull out, despite knowing Chuaning would get sick. An insatiable fire burned in his heart, a beastly desire that couldn't be suppressed. Chuaning was the only water that could quench the flames, his only safe harbor. He wanted to ravage him, then retrace the ruined wreckage of his body with kisses. As for Chuaning, he slowly extricated himself from his debilitating sorrow. Working in secret, he gathered up clues. He knew someone had planted the flower of eightfold sorrows in Moran, but what were they plotting, and what did they hope to accomplish? Although the demon tribe's text said the flower couldn't be excised in the third stage of its development, Chuaning didn't intend to give up. As ever, he was obstinate and unwilling to concede defeat. He refused to bend to fate. The days passed like this, one after another. Ever since the loss of his spiritual energy, Chuaning found himself tiring easily. Having to make sure nobody else discovered his investigations made it worse. It would be nigh impossible to find the mastermind behind the scenes, and the thought of uprooting the flower was pure fantasy. At the same time, the goal of whoever was controlling Moran became more and more clear. For Moran began to study the space-time gates of life and death. Adding up here, there's a third person here that we're not taking into account. Is it the Ghost King? Because it can't, like... It can't be Shimei unless he faked his death. But something about that doesn't feel true. I think he mentioned that he faked his death to Moran, but I feel like he was lying to Moran. I guess maybe he wasn't, and me thinking that he is just overcomplicating things and making me be unable to see the facts for what they are. But what catches me here is if Shimei isn't dead at this point, then why would someone need to go back to the past? Because assumedly it would have been in order to save Shimei, but if Shimei is alive in this timeline, then that doesn't make sense. So there is some piece of unknown information here that we still need to find out. Probably a lot. Probably not just one piece. This venerable one won't be able to learn the rebirth technique. Chuaning remembered watching Moran as he stood before a window, hands behind his back, gazing at a twittering oriole outside. I looked at the scrolls. Only people with a heavy yin aura can use it, he said calmly, then glanced over his shoulder at Chuaning. I'll learn the first forbidden technique instead. The space-time gate? Naturally. You can't master it. Moran had merely smiled. I have to at least try before conceding defeat. Who are you to say what I can and can't do? What do you know? Chuaning shook his head. The first forbidden technique defies the natural order of the world. It will rip open a portal between two unconnected universes the will of heaven has never permitted. What's so great about the will of heaven? Moran retorted, his eyes languid and unconcerned. Why would I need its permission? This venerable one has never believed in fate. Moran thus embarked upon his research. Knowledge regarding the first forbidden technique had been lost for a very long time. Even with all his resources as an omnipotent emperor, Moran managed to secure after much difficulty merely a fragment of the ancient scrolls, and even this was still missing the most important passages. Without complete instructions, Moran could only create a space gate. He was unable to command both space and time. More and more, Chuaning began to understand why the flower's architect had planted this curse in Moran. Vanishingly few people possessed Moran's astonishing potent reserves of spiritual energy, which would be necessary to accomplish their objectives. Whoever it was didn't want to rule the world. Instead, Chuaning suspected that their ultimate goal was to open the space-time gate, and they were seeking more than a small rip in space-time. Rather, they were probably intending to fuse two separate universes into one. Heaven forbid. Please, heaven forbid this. I don't want this. It's against the rules of heaven for a reason. Let's not. Okay, so we are at the end of a chapter, and the chapter title just decided for me whether or not I am going to be going on. And the answer is we're not going on tonight. I'm sorry. So, to give context, the next chapter is called Going Back, and I can only assume that means returning to the present. And I don't know if I'm mentally prepared for that. I quite enjoyed not crying during these past 2 hours. But it was still a lot. Like, even though it wasn't tear-inducing, it was still quite heavy. And I'm gonna be honest, I didn't know if I am up for doing more than 2 hours of this volume. Let's think. Let me see how many pages have we done. Yes, it is page 87. So we did... yeah, we didn't do really well this time around. We did 34 pages, which is not promising. Yeah, 3 hours might get heavy for this volume. Yeah, so I think to be safe, just so you guys kind of can know for future reference, I think we're gonna cap it at 2 hours just for this volume, and we'll see how the next volume treats us, and you know, decide at that point. Disabled Turns Beloved Pitfish, I don't think I'll have a problem doing 3 hours again, and that's obviously gonna be in between volume 8 and volume 9 of ErHa. So for now we're kind of playing it by ear, but I think just to shape your guys' expectations, we're probably gonna be doing 2 hours each session for the rest of volume 8, just to allow my brain a little bit of time to cope, because that's a lot and I am way too emotionally invested. So yeah, I'm sorry for that. I will see if maybe, depending on how things go, we can maybe do like 2 separate live streams at some point before the end of volume 8, to do a little bit more in 1 week. But yeah, anyway, I will see you guys again next Monday for the next session, and I'm very nervous because weirdly enough this break into the past was a bit of a reprieve, which I didn't expect. I think it was because it wasn't as rapey as usual, and it was more focused on like sad but beautiful memories from Chuaning about the past Moran. So that helped. I think that was what I needed before we dive into assumedly Shimei tormenting Chuaning back in the present. So anyway, I will stop talking now. I hope you guys have an amazing rest of your day, and I will see you guys again next week. 再见。